Okay, so officially we are recording now. Hi, Lisa. Glad to see you here. Glad to see everybody here. We've got a good, nice, warm turnout today. So my name is Alexis Clifton. I am the Executive Director of SUNY OER Services. I'm pinch hitting, facilitating this webinar. I'm really happy to do that, though. Normally these are hosted by our wonderful colleague, Erin Maney, who's with the Open SUNY office, which is online course and instructional design and support across our SUNY system. She does a lot of work with us at SUNY OER Services as well, including help build community engagement activities like this one. So this showcase webinar series is a program offered monthly by SUNY OER Services, and our aim is to feature OER faculty champions across our diverse community of practitioners, like Elizabeth, who have elevated their teaching practice by incorporating OER into their courses. In doing so, these faculty have positively impacted their students' learning experiences, making higher education more accessible, affordable, and engaging. Fully support that. We are excited to share this webinar with you. So let me make sure I'm on the right screen and advance my slide here. So with us today, we have I don't have my notes right, sorry. I'm about to start giving you my introduction again. You don't need that. So today we have with us Elizabeth Johnston, an associate professor of English at Monroe Community College. Dr. Johnston received her PhD in 18th century British literature with an emphasis on women writers from West Virginia University in 2005. She's a widely published scholar and creative writer, teaches in the English and Philosophy department at Monroe Community College with a focus on writing, literature, and gender studies. Dr. Johnston has been the recipient of a number of awards and fellowships related to online teaching and learning. From 2012 to 13, she served as a fellow for the Community Center of Teaching Excellence. She won the 2014 SUNY Excellence in Teaching Award, and more recently, the 2017 SUNY's Spring Traveling Lecturer Award to St. Petersburg, Russia. She has also been recognized as an Open SUNY Online Teaching Ambassador for her enthusiasm and dedication to online teaching and learning. Additionally, she has advocated for and piloted open educational resources. Since 2014, she has served as an outside consultant for Excelsior College's online writing and reading labs, and is currently teaching several OER course sections as part of MCC's Achieving the Dream grant. Welcome, Elizabeth. Thank you for sharing your time and expertise with us today.
Thank you.
So just let me know when you want to advance the slides and I will turn it over to you.
You can go ahead and advance it.
Okay.
So my guess is that nobody's here unless you're already interested in open educational resources. And so I'm going to move through this first slide very quickly. The reasons why I got into teaching OER are probably the same reasons that you're all interested in it. I was very concerned about the costs of textbooks. I've said this a number of times when I've talked about OER, that I had never thought about textbook costs, because when I had been hired as a graduate teaching assistant at West Virginia University, they gave us, was probably then like an open educational resource. It had been put together by the faculty, and then we had a reader that they also provided with us, and I can't remember the publisher that did that one. So I taught with that for several years. I moved on to Indiana University of Pennsylvania as a visiting instructor, and so I took what I was teaching at WVU and just brought it over. And they actually, again, gave me a text to use. And so I didn't have any choices. When I got to MCC, I finally had choices, and I had publishers coming to my door all the time. I wound up being the composition coordinator. And so then publishers were sort of courting me because they knew that I would be influential in making just textbook decisions. And I still was not thinking about what the textbooks cost. I had been fairly privileged growing up from a middle-class family, hadn't had to buy textbooks on my own. My parents paid for my tuition. I always bought more books than I needed because I'm an English person. And when I began teaching, if students came without their books, I would ask them to leave the class because, and I would use the analogy, you don't come to an operating room if you're a surgeon without your scalpel. So you can't come to a class where we're studying literature, we're studying what's in our textbooks if you don't have it with you. Which in retrospect was good in theory, but I wasn't thinking about the fact that so many of our students simply could not afford the textbook. And it was when a student, a very diligent, earnest student, came up to me after class one day. She hadn't had her textbook, and she said, "Do you know that the textbook," and it did, you know, it was $75, and I could not believe, and that's pretty, I mean, English textbooks tend to be cheaper than other disciplines, but I couldn't believe that the textbook I had ordered without even thinking about it was so much money. And so I began to look at the other ways that I could incorporate or make my choices more affordable for my students. So initially I started working with publishers, and they had all kinds of options like custom made textbooks, which I thought sounded great because you could make them smaller than the original and only use what you needed, except that the students couldn't sell those back then. And so you had to buy new every semester. We just tried all kinds of things, electronic supplements that you had, or bundling books. But ultimately, I still had lots of students who weren't able to afford the options that I was giving them. And about that same time, Excelsior College contacted me because I was the composition coordinator, and they asked me if I would be interested in piloting a section of their online writing lab that was devoted to argument. If I would do that in my composition courses in 2 sections, and be part of the assessment of how well those argument sections worked for the students. And it ended up being really popular with the students and highly successful. My students did really well with using that argument section of what was an open educational resource instead of what I had would have provided for them in a textbook. And so I ended up being on the, long story short, ended up being on the advisory board and helping to develop different aspects of the online writing lab. And now they have an online reading comprehension lab as well. And I'm going to talk about that more. But on this particular slide, I just listed some things that might be already known to you, some statistics you might already know, some that are specific to MCC, that a third of our community colleges students live in poverty, 14% are homeless. Now we have a number of conferences devoted to understanding that our students aren't even food secure a lot of the time, and so purchasing textbooks is so low on their priority scale. So that's something I always bear in mind, is, you know, if what I'm asking the students to pay for is going to make them choose between you know, lunch or dinner and the cost of whatever I'm asking them to buy for my course. The other thing that I think the OER does, in addition to lowering cost, is it speaks to the needs of 21st century learners, and specifically, I think, our first generation college students, which are such a large population of students at MCC. They tend to leave college with greater student debt than their counterparts, and tend to struggle with, as you all probably know, lack of familial support, difficulty adjusting to college, not being academically ready. And so for all of those reasons, they need a lot more support than the traditional student. And I think, and I'll talk about why I think OER helps with that. 44% of our students do receive Pell Grants, but 10 years after graduation, our average graduate is only earning $34,000 a year, and we know what that can purchase in this economy. And the median debt when they leave for school is $11,500 from MCC. At MCC in particular, we have a 53% full-time retention rate and a 65% course completion rate. So those are things that we are working to improve upon, and I think that offering these open educational resources is key to improving retention and success. And the other thing that's specific to English 101 is that since I came to MCC, we've hovered right around 50 to 60% C or better rate in English 101. And so that's always been on my radar as something I want to try to improve, and we've tried a number of different pilots and initiatives, and I am really convinced now that the open educational resources is one way to improve that C or better rate. So I'm going to pause there in case there's any questions before I move on.
And I should say, feel free to add questions as we go in the chat, and I'll try and help. I'll help moderate that as well.
Okay, you can do the next slide then. Okay, So some of this I've skipped ahead in what I'm talking about. Obviously, open educational resources, they're not all free. The ones that I use are free, and that means that the students have access to this material on day one, and therefore have less stress that's going to impact their motivation. Importantly, too, the ones that I use, and specifically I'm going to talk in detail about Excelsior College's online writing lab and their online reading comprehension lab. These are multimodal. So students are getting traditional text on, it's electronic, so traditional text on those websites, but there are also a lot of prezzies and audio narrated PowerPoints and videos and interactive quizzes, and even a little animated game that they can play to teach them more about some of the skills that we're trying to accomplish in English 101. And this is, of course, this multimodality is especially sensitive to our 21st century learners who are increasingly moving away from text-based literacy into these multiple modes. So I like being able to offer them these various options for their learning preferences. Another reason that I like the OER and I think that it's superior to traditional text-based courses is that I can embed it directly into our learning management system at MCC, which is Blackboard. And this is really great because our first generation students, we have a giant population of those, and we have a lot of students who are just at risk and that's why they're at the community college. They have difficulty organizing, they lose their materials, they have learning disabilities oftentimes, and so their attention span in class, you can start to see them, I'm sure as you know from teaching, zoning out, falling asleep. So the OER that I use is embedded right into the learning management system. So students can always go back and review what we went over in class. They can download any handouts that I provided them into class that they might have misplaced or lost or written on but want a brand new copy of. So that's always available to them. Another thing I really like about the electronic OER is that when I have all of my students submit their papers electronically. So they submit everything through Dropboxes and Blackboard, and I grade everything for them through those Dropboxes. So both my online and my face-to-face students do this, which is great during flu season because I'm not collecting any print papers and collecting all those germs. So, but I like it because one, students, again, they tend to be somewhat disorganized, and they're still in the gateway courses, still trying to figure out how college works and what they need to pay attention to. So they can always resubmit if they had problems resubmitting it in the first place, or they submitted the wrong draft. But I can embed links to the open educational resource. Specifically, I do this a lot with the grammar essentials section that I'm going to show you. So if a student is struggling with a particular grammatical skill, like commas, I can embed a link that takes them directly to the OER that I'm using and walks them through tutorials. So it's a just-in-time function. And finally, the fifth reason that I really like the OER is just the flexibility that it allows me to. I always felt like when I was teaching from these textbooks that I had ordered from the publisher, and the students are hauling them in their backpacks with all their other textbooks, I always felt like really compelled to use as much of the textbook as possible, and sometimes that meant foregoing, wanting to slow down and spend more time on a particular skill, because I felt like we needed to move on and use everything that I'd made them pay for. So these materials are flexible. They didn't pay for them. I can spend as much time on any one section as I want, and I can add to the textbook as well, because the license allows me to add to, supplement, change, revise, whatever I need to do with the materials to make them more suitable for my specific groups of students every single semester. I can change it every semester. I can change it day to day. So I love that flexibility. We can move on to the next slide. So I made this slide. I'm not sure, Alexis. I inserted a link, so you'll be able to actually, from your end, click on the link, I think, that will take us out to the OWL. Will that work for you? So it should be, if you just click on it, no, it doesn't.
Okay, for some reason, it doesn't want to let me do that.
Okay, so I embedded a link, right? It was working on my screen, but.
So I put the link in the chat, and I actually have it open in another window, so I can.
Okay, you could always go to that. So before you open that up, I just wanted to show what's on this particular slide. So Excelsior has an online writing lab. They actually began, the history is that they began with an ESL writing online workshop, which you can see in the left-hand menu further down. It's maybe eight lines down there in the left-hand menu. That's where they began, and then they have just, based on what students need and what teachers are telling Excelsior that we need, they continue to add and build. And so they have the online writing lab, they have the online reading comprehension lab, which is separate, but you can see at the top in the purple, you can navigate between those, the writing lab, the reading lab. And then they've added now a whole section that's just for educators. People who are using this OER are blogging about ways that they use it. There's sample assignments, there's sample syllabi there for how to use this. So that's a really great resource if you want to come, if anybody in here wants to come back and look at this. But the writing lab, you can see, is split up into modules. So the writing process and researching and citing and documenting and rhetorical styles. That argument and critical thinking is the section that I piloted in my own classes and got me hooked on the OWL. There's a whole section on online writing and presentations. So you can see that I think of it like chapters in a textbook. So I do use this as my primary text. I do not have another textbook that I use. I sometimes bring in essays that I want students to read, but this is my textbook. So if you can take us out there, I'll show you the offerings in it.
Okay, get the right screen in the right place. All right, just tell me where you want me to go.
Okay, so I mentioned embedding direct links out to the Grammar Essentials section, so that's right there. Yep, if you click on that, and then, yep, click on that. Okay, it's just got fun images throughout. One of the other things they do, when this was being fleshed out a couple of years ago, and everything was about The Walking Dead and all of these zombie movies, a lot of the animations actually deal with zombies, and students really love that. That one's not, though. Okay, so there in the left-hand menu, it says punctuation, parts of speech, and 20 most common grammar. So if you click on the punctuation, you can see all of the different punctuation that students struggle with. A lot of times, the commas, and I'll use that as an example. So if you click on the commas, okay, if you actually just click on where it says commas, okay, so it's got kind of an introductory paragraph here about commas, but if you click next, okay, it walks students through all of these various rules for how to use commas. So I am currently teaching an ALP co-requisite course. So I have students who are, they would typically be in a developmental course, and they have been paired with my freshman composition course. I've got basically half the class is freshman composition, and the other half is my developmental ed students, and they stay with me an hour after the course ends each day to skill build. And so in addition to embedding links when I'm grading students' papers, and I'm seeing that all of my students are dealing with different grammatical or mechanical errors, I actually use this in class with my developmental ed students. For example, this shows them one of these rules about how to use coordinating conjunctions. And so we spend maybe 5 minutes in class going over these rules, talking about this acronym, fanboys. And then I have students pull out the draft that they're working on, and they look specifically for these words, for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so, and circle them and look to see if they actually are using them correctly. And then, so that takes maybe 15 minutes, and then we move on to the next rule. So it's interactive, and the students can ask me questions the whole way through. if you look at that left-hand gray menu, and then you scroll down to where it says tips, I'm sorry, a little bit up, tips from the, I'm sorry, try it out. Up, a little bit further up, although it probably doesn't matter. Okay. Oh no, something happened. That's
okay.
not the right place.
Okay, let me go back. So commas, try it out. There we go. Okay,
Yeah.
sorry about that.
Okay. So you could assign this activity to your students if you were teaching. I don't know if I would do this just in my freshman comp class. This was specific for me for developmental students. So I've done this in class with my developmental students. So they have to drag the comma to where they think it needs to go. And we do this as a class. It's a small class. There's only 12 students in it. If they get it wrong, so they decide together. So you've got this collaborative learning. If they get it wrong, we get to talk about why they got it wrong. And if we need to, right in class, we can go back and review any of the rules to which this applies. So they really like this. And again, they can always go and review it at home too. So when I grade their papers online, I will often say things like, I see that you're still really struggling with commas, and I see it's specific to dealing with coordinating conjunctions. So here's the link that you can always go back to, remember, and review this, and why don't you bring your draft in next class and try to have corrected the commas. So it allows for individual work, then collaborative work, and then going back to individual work and application. So I really like the grammar essentials. You can see there's a lot of them. Almost all of the punctuations have try it like this. So that's specific to commas, but you saw, I think, semicolons, there's one there. So that's grammar. If you want to look at the research module, we can, I'm probably getting ahead of myself. Actually, would you go back out to the PowerPoint slide? It's very easy for me to just kind of follow my train here. So on the next, okay, yeah. Okay, so this is, so my freshman composition students are obviously going to be writing a research paper, and we spend 6 to 7 weeks on it, walking them through the entire process. And I really love the research module in the OWL. If you click obviously on any of those pluses when we're on the actual web page, they open up, and I've clicked to open evaluating sources here, so you can see the different topics: source suitability, authority and authorship, evaluating sources, timely. So they would read through all of that. I would typically assign this to them for homework. Can you go back out to the video or to the website?
Sure. We can always have you screen share too, if that would be easier.
Okay.
So if I go back to research.
Yeah, to research, and then scroll to evaluating sources. It's about halfway there. Yep.
Okay.
Okay. So click on evaluation checklist. Okay. So this is one of the downloadable handouts that are, there's tons of these throughout the entire website for them. So I would have them for homework in this section of the research project where they've collected sources and they're now evaluating the sources that they've collected from the library. I would make them fill out this evaluation checklist, so they would have to download it and fill it out for each of the sources that they're planning to use. There's also underneath, if you click on See It in Practice, there are videos throughout that walk, where students can see real students walking through each of these skill building activities. I don't know if you want to play that video or not. They're usually 2 minutes or so. I don't know why you're not getting any sound.
Probably because I have mine muted. I'm trying. Okay, so I hear the sound.
In the passages you see here, I made some notes to address the...
Can you hear the sound now?
I can, yeah.
Okay. Do you want me to keep playing it?
Yeah, you don't have to. I think everybody has the idea, but you get to watch the student all the way through her research process. each step of the way, so they can use this as a model, see how other students are doing it. And then, of course, underneath each module, each mini module, there's always a time to write, which gives them an activity that they need to do based on the skills that they just learned. There's also video transcripts that you can always click on, right? So it just reminds them to use the evaluation checklist, and is general enough that you compare it with any research project that you're doing in your class. If we go back to the PowerPoint.
Sure.
Okay.
There we go.
So in my advanced composition course, we spent a lot of time on logical fallacies, and I really love what the OWL did with the logical fallacies. I got to help in creating these, and they've got, so we'll come back out to that. So I would have students watch, and I'll show you the various tutorials on logical fallacies. There's videos, and then they would work in groups with whatever, maybe a sample essay that I gave them to identify logical fallacies that from this list that they've learned on the OWL, and then, of course, on their own to examine their own writing for the very same logical fallacies that they've reviewed in the tutorials and with their group mates in class. If we come back out, I'll show you one of the example logical fallacies.
Sorry, random clicking.
Okay, so it's going to be under argument and critical thinking.
Okay.
Okay, and then logical fallacies, yep.
Okay.
Okay, so any of those you can click on.
Good old straw man.
Straw man. Okay. So you have the example, I think pollution from humans contributes to climate change, and the person two responding, so you think humans are directly responsible for extreme weather like hurricanes, et cetera, et cetera. There's also the animated comics that go with this. So there's lots of different modes that students can learn the concepts that we're working with. And an explanation underneath. In the menu on the left-hand side, if you click on putting it all together, again, you get to walk with the student through as he thinks about the assignment. The student's name is Matteo, and he's trying to analyze logical fallacies in some sources that he's identified for his research. There's a video in this section called Analyze This, which is right underneath that in the left-hand menu. Okay, it's another student, a real life one. The other one was animated. This one's a real life student examining some advertising for fallacies. And so I'm assuming that a lot of people who teach composition and teach logical fallacies use advertising and television commercials and political ads because they're so full of logical fallacies. So this is what this is, looking at some advertisements and see it in practice. Okay, you would see a student revising her essay to make sure she herself has avoided logical fallacies. So when I assign this, depending on how long the class, if it's a 50-minute class, a 70-minute class, what the needs of the students are, I might have students review all of the logical fallacies at home, review the videos at home, and then when they come into class, there's actually a chart that lists all of them, so they would have the handout of the chart, and then they would be applying it to either a practice essay or their own essay individually or in groups, depending on the size of the class. So if you go back to the PowerPoint, the next slide, okay. Just out of curiosity, before I go over this, I don't know how many of you teach reading strategies. Is that something that you're all interested in hearing about, the Reading Comprehension Lab? I don't know if anybody's saying yes or no.
I'm not seeing anything in the chat yet. There's a yeah.
Okay, you do. Okay. All right. So I love the Reading Comprehension Lab. This is proven to be the, so I've been 2 semesters now teaching developmental English. And I really believe very strongly that the major deficit in the students coming to MCC is reading comprehension and the ability to do critical reading, and that even before writing feels to me so crucial to try to support. And so we spend a lot of time working on reading strategies, and never ceases to amaze me that things that I take for granted about how I read, the sorts of things that I do when I read, students they've never even thought of doing these things. So not even like looking at the title, right? Reading it and never even paying attention to the title of what they're reading. So I love the reading section. You can see the menu here, and these, again, I'd like you, I would say think of these like chapters in a book. They've got excellent sections, and previewing, questioning, annotating, inferencing, et cetera, et cetera. If you want to go back out to the website for that.
Okay, now we go up here to the Reading Lab.
Yep. And if you, click right on the Reading Lab, and you can even hit the Before Reading tab if you want. Okay.
Sorry.
So those are all the chapters, but here in the left-hand menu, they've also broken it down by, I guess, what you would think of modules. So what to do before reading. The very first week when students were assigned an essay to read in my freshman composition class, and the hour afterwards with my other students, they hadn't even read it yet. I had just handed out the essay to them to take home and read. These students met with me, and we talked about how to preview the text. So if you click on the plus next to the previewing, and then on the activity, so this gives them a sample textbook chapter, and they would read through it. If you scroll down, keep scrolling. Keep scrolling. It's long. I like to challenge them. Right. So then it's got these different interactive quizzes. And again, you could ask students to do this for homework, or you could do it in class with them, depending on the size of the class. So, so yeah, pick any one and check it. And it's wrong, right? So you got to figure out what's wrong with it. And that gives, in class, when you do this, it opens up really interesting conversations. Right.
Sorry. Okay, I'll stop playing.
Okay, right. Okay. If you scroll back up to the top and click on the left-hand menu on Handouts. Okay. So they've got, if you have a color printer, they've provided a handout to you in color, but obviously I don't for my students. So if you click just the black and white one. Okay. So I printed this out for my students, and I have 8 students actually in that developmental ed class. We took the essay out, we sat in a circle, and then we went right through each of those bullets, scan the titles, skim the first paragraph, skim the last paragraph, just through each one of these all together, and talked about why that would improve their ability to read and understand what they're getting ready to read. And the students loved it. I learned so much about their reading just by breaking it down. So much of this, like I said, I would have taken for granted. So I love that every single module on the ORC has handouts like this. And I actually printed all of them out for my students. I think there were maybe, not all of them, I probably printed out 20 and just gave them in a packet to my students. So they have it hard copy, they have it available to them electronically. And again, I can always embed direct links to this if I really see them struggling with something. So that might be, I guess we could look at one other thing in the Reading Lab. If you click back on there, yeah. Do what to do while reading. Okay. This annotating, trying to get my students to annotate. So I love this. It's separated by types of things that they might be annotating. So how an essay differs from a textbook, how a textbook differs from a journal article. If your students are like my students, they call everything stories. So it gives me an opportunity to talk about why it's not a story and what kind of source it actually is, and why you might want to apply different strategies to that source based on the kind of source that it is. You can look at any of those that you want to open up. Some of them have like 3 activities that you can do together. That's a good one. So
just tell me, do you want me to play them?
Yeah, you can, if you want to. That one's a long one. That's 9 minutes long. So I had them, because that was so long, I had them watch that at home.
Mm-hmm.
But then we did the activities together in class. Right, which gives you sample paragraphs, and then the students have to, it's that same sort of check. Right. You can click anywhere on it to try and figure out which one's the main idea.
I'm not very good at this without having.
Right, so that's one activity. If you click on the activity 2, and start the activity. So this asks them to look specifically for transitional words. So we did this in class as well, and it gives them an opportunity to test out that vocabulary and to ask me questions as we move through it. Right, and then you get to check it.
Yeah.
Any kind of game, right? As simple as it is, they love it. They get so happy if they get it right.
Boo. Okay. Oh, it gets cumulative. Okay.
Yeah. Activity 3, I'm trying to remember what it is. Okay. So if you click the blue arrow, yeah, you can do it that way. You can. So this one is interesting. So they actually write. So they can type this. They can type answers. So if you wanted to have students do homework on this, right? So you would write whatever you're going to write in there. Yep. And go ahead and click next. Right. Same thing. And this one asks them, they have to write down a question in response to the text, whereas the first one's a comment and question. So this is teaching them when they're annotating the different, different kinds of annotations that you might provide on the text. And then you can, if you wanted your students to then send to you what they had worked on, they would just click create document and download it, and however they're going to bring it in, print it out, or I would have them upload it into Blackboard. And then there's handouts for that as well. The vocabulary strategies section is really great as well. And we had a whole team of reading teachers do the Reading Comprehension Lab, and I learned so much just from listening to them talk about what students need. It really improved working with the OER. This is maybe, I didn't add this to the PowerPoint, but working with this particular OER has made me a better teacher, because it's had things in it that I would not have looked for, but now are there. And so I've learned, I have, like, I'd never heard of a Kim chart. And so now I have my students do Kim charts. And I had never really done word webs. I knew what they were, but now I can, I have students. So in fact, last night for homework, they had to create Kim charts. So they learn about them. They do an activity in class. I give them the handout, and then whatever we read from my freshman comp class, they are doing a Kim chart for it. And then we'll compare the chart in class, next class. So I think it's 12:40. We've got about 10 minutes left. Is that correct?
The last 10 minutes are kind of slotted for Q&A, so we've got about 10 minutes of presentation time left.
Okay. I have to be at a class at 1 o'clock.
Oh, okay. Okay, perfect. I didn't know.
So it looks like I have one more slide. I'm not sure. Oh, this is student feedback.
Oh, we should definitely do that then.
Yeah. Okay, not that one. That one I feel like I already did.
Okay.
There we go, that one. All right. So I've been collecting feedback from my students every semester that I've used the OWL, and so I compiled just some of I haven't received any negative feedback. The students love it, and so I prompt them. So the 2 questions that I asked them was, one that I tell them in this cost-cutting strategy, I use this open educational resource, and that it's not a physical textbook. I do give them some physical handouts, but a lot of what they do is just electronic on the smart board or watching on their own on their computers or on it's all can be done on their smartphones as well. And so I asked them if they would have preferred a physical textbook. And you can see in the very first one, I was happy to see that there were no physical textbooks. I have 5 grammar books, all unused. I find the internet resources more than adequate. This both saves the student money and avails them of current, updated, and relevant resources, which is really fantastic since MLA seems to be changing their rules every year or so, right? This is always flexible. It's always, it's much more updated than any hard copy. I also asked them, I used Excelsior OWL, I used the Purdue OWL, I did some screencast tutorials that I had made, and I asked them which ones they liked the most, which ones they bookmarked. And I had a number of students say things like they had bookmarked the OWL to take with them to other courses, that they were always going to be using the OWL, even after they left my writing class. So you can, I won't read for you all of the feedback, but you can read on your own there that they love it, which confirms to me that this is the right kind of source to be using, because their grades are better and they are enjoying the experience more.
Excellent. So as you said, I think that's your last slide. So we've got time now for Q&A if anybody wants to see more, learn more, ask questions about anything that Elizabeth's doing. Pick her brain. As you're thinking, typing, feel free to take over the mic and talk too. This is a small enough group that won't be a problem. And you're seeing the chat there too, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. I guess I could open it up. Yeah. Oh, that's great.
Mm-hmm.
That's wonderful. So the writing studies, that's fantastic. That the ORC is like I said, I think it's just amazing for anybody who's teaching reading, any developmental course. So supplemental readings and articles. So yes, there's, I put together a variety of different resources. So I went to Lumen Learning. I do a writing about writing approach in my class. So all of the assignments are around literacy. So they begin with summarizing an article, and then they write their own literacy narrative, and then they do, and it's a source-based literacy narrative. So there are a number of literacy narratives that are Creative Commons licensed that you can use as models for students. So I bring those into class, and students practice both summarizing them and synthesizing them and responding to them. So that works really well. They do read a couple of chapters from some different composition textbooks that I found. And I can send you the names of those textbooks if you'd like to. One is about academic research. Another one that they read is about rhetorical analysis, and it's fantastic. It's called Backpacks and Briefcases. Another one also about rhetorical analysis that I use, and that's an article from an online OER textbook, takes this idea of, it works specifically with teaching the students more about audience. And it's fantastic because it walks students through a murder case and has them imagine themselves. It also offers activities, but imagine themselves as the juror, as or the judge, the jury, the lawyer. So all of them taking these different sides of the argument, and the students love that particular reading. So there are a lot of readings that I provide supplementarily for the students.
Sorry, so as you were talking, I was also kind of showing around, getting some links to people.
Okay.
Yeah, so I should have said I'm a big fangirl of Elizabeth because I'm also a composition instructor by background, and spent many years and missed doing it. So we can totally geek out about composition-based OER specifically. But two things that I will recommend as resources for anybody that's interested. We do have this open-nys.org website that we do try to point to specific OER resources for particular disciplines. And so you can see, you know, there are several here on the page that are English communication oriented. One of those, you kind of have to dig through several links. So to jump to it directly, there's the composition, and then I went to the reading anthology because I just happen to know that that's where it lives. And in that reading anthology, it has a bunch of openly licensed sources itself, and then it also has a list at the front that goes to more either public domain or openly licensed content that could be found, that you could mine for additional reading content too.
And if you scroll down, if you scroll back down, no, I guess the other way. Oh, no, too far. There's one that says writing sources, it begins with writing spaces. That I think is a really fantastic open textbook. That's where I pull a lot of my chapters. That murder, it has murder in the title. Yes. I can't remember. And backpacks versus briefcases is in there. And there's one about introduction to academic research. Those are all, I love every single chapter in this book.
I agree.
Yeah.
So I should say about the openness site, this is by no means an exhaustive list of every OER that's out there for these disciplines, but we do kind of keep a curated list of things that we know that faculty within SUNY are using or recommend to others. So I guess we can vouch for everything that's here, but it shouldn't be the only place you're looking around. And so for all the disciplines, I would also recommend cruising this general resources for all disciplines because that's some big buckets to sift through as well. Great question, though. And yeah, I know. Teaching contemporary stuff is hard because most of it is all rights reserved copyright, but that's okay.
Yeah.
Good. Other questions or thoughts? I'm really loving the Excelsior OWL and appreciate your.
I'm biased. I'm on the advisory, but I wouldn't be on the advisory board. I don't get any money for being on the advisory board. I'm just on it because I just love it. I just think it's a fantastic resource.
Nice. Other thoughts? I don't want to cut anybody off if you're typing. Well, I will point out, so I won't make it big again, but as we talked about at the beginning, we will be mailing out a follow-up resource that includes a link back to the recording if you want to share this with friends and family later, you know, on your Valentine's date tonight, want to talk about composition OER resources. For you for that. And you can always reach out to us through openness.org. And be happy to talk more about what we do as an organization and how we support SUNY institutions, but also provide connections to outside. And I'm really happy to see how many people outside our system have come to us today. So really nice to have guests. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Elizabeth, for your time today. I know you have a class you need to get to. I don't want to make you.
Yeah, and that's fine. It's my composition course. And I would say anybody who wants to send me an email, if you have questions about any of this, feel free to reach out to me. I'd be happy to forward to you any of the materials that I've collated and pass them on. Share and share alike.
Would you mind typing your email in the chat here? I'm not sure that I have it.
Sure.
I always feel more comfortable when people type their own email rather than.
Yeah. So definitely feel free to reach out to me if you have questions or would like me to share some of my material.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
again, well, we'll wrap up a few minutes early today. Again, people have lunch to finish eating or classes to dash to, but appreciate your time. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording now and let
Thank
everybody
you, guys.
continue to chat if you'd like. I'll stay here.
Okay. I'm going to go ahead and log out since I got to run.
Great. Okay. Thank you again.
Thank you.